Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us to our daily stand-up. And let me first introduce myself. My name is Ivailu. I'm the CEO of AstrumDrive Technologies, and we're joined by Nelson. He's the head of our physics department. So today we're going to share up one of our daily stand-ups. And Nelson, can you please go ahead and tell us a little bit more what we did in the last several days and what we're currently working on? And I'm going to share the Jira board as well.
Hi, Valo. Hi, everyone. Sure. Uh, okay, guys, let me try to summarize what we've been working in the last few days. There are several topics that we were touching in parallel. We are basically two teams working so far, uh, and there was one thing here, one thing in Venezuela. Uh, the together we're touching these topics basically in the last few days. One and the most important at this point is that we're studying junction conditions. Let me try to motivate a bit what these junction conditions mean. Junction condition in this scenario of general relativity, it means that you have an space-time, a metric which defines the space-time, a metric and another metric. And those metrics, in this case, we will have a bubble has a metric that defines how space-time itself is inside this bubble. In this case, it's going to be an Atarius metric, which is a warp drive metric. But we are studying the previous cases. Which cases are we studying? We want this metric and see how to match this metric to an outside metric. So you have two types of spacetimes, one inside and one outside. So
One
what we're
inside,
doing
one
is
inside and one outside of the bubble, right? So this is what we're talking about. One
yeah,
inside of
yeah,
the warp bubble and one outside of the warp bubble. Okay, so I just wanted to be clear about that. And you're saying that inside of the bubble we have one type of space-time, and outside of the bubble we have another type of space-time. And by studying the junction conditions, we want to understand how these space-times are connected and how they're interacting, right?
yeah. That's exactly
Okay,
how
okay, okay.
they interact. Yeah. It's how they interact, and also they will have an impact on how the matter that is going to be in this configuration is going. Which is the matter that can be there. I mean, this will restrict. There will be constraints on matter behavior due to this junction condition. So it's really important that not any kind of matter you can put inside. You have to obey. You have Einstein's equations. That's what tells you matter and space-time, how they both are connected. And that's true. And inside, you have an observer that is outside, and but also you can be an observer that is inside, and both observers are completely different. They don't are connected. So you have to describe everything from in and from out and see how to match what people are seeing outside and inside. So we're doing that in some astrophysical scenarios where are scenarios that are already known, and we're reproducing some calculations from very important uh, researchers. These calculations are made using anisotropies, which is the type of matter or condition of matter that we want to put in our system. So basically, that's what we're understanding how uh, the first and second fundamental form, which are basically the Darbois conditions, are going to be used to connect and to match these two space-times. That's a basic, the first part of what we're doing up to these days. I don't know if you have any other question.
Do you mind explaining a little bit more what exactly is the first and the second fundamental form?
Sure, sure. For basically, first fundamental form, you want this to match. It means that you want that the components of the matrix, that matrix that describes out space-time outside and inside, matches at some. surface, some surface that you call an hypersurface, and this surface, which you have to also define mathematically, and at this boundary, then you say both metrics, each component of the metric has to be the same. That's one thing. The other hand, which is all this thing that I'm saying at the end is what we call Darmois conditions. Is second fundamental form is more related to the derivatives of the metric, how the derivatives of the component of the metric inside outside, how they match together. I mean, matching means two things. One thing is that they are the same. Is do you to say when you evaluate the components from inside and outside metrics at that surface, you say they have to give you the same value, or uh, they don't give the same value. They don't actually are the same, but you know exactly how they are different, which is that you have some singularity that you can control. So those both directions you want to handle both, and from one side it's useful to describe when you have matter on the bubble itself, which means that you have some singularity, something there, and when there is a continuous, which means that the components are just equal, and then it's okay. It's empty space, but a place in space-time where both metrics are matching together. Of course, both things are related to what we call intrinsic and extrinsic curvature, which is or compresses into the definitions of which components and how the components are going to be together. But this is a bit more technical.
Yes, and thank you very much for explaining all of that. So in this case, let us go to the tasks we're currently doing today. So do you mind first to cover the task which Gabriel is doing and explain what exactly he's doing?
Yes. Well, what Gabriel is doing is, uh, well, from one side, he was studying junction conditions in general. We need to understand that several approaches that you can have for making the junction condition. So he's reproducing the conditions from a spherical symmetric space-time from inside and outside, and seeing how they match together in the middle. And this hypersurface, which is of course going to be a spherical or is spherical, and he was studying these Darmois conditions, calculating the extrinsic curvature also, which is very helpful for later calculations. And also he studied how to make the match, the junction, using also the continuity of the energy momentum tensor, which is already then a constraint on the energy momentum tensor. This is going to be important. So at that point, you have not the most general energy momentum tensor, but you have a question of continuity, which we use the word continuity, but in fact it's telling you how the changes of energy momentum tensor are going to be on the surface, which again could be, for example, zero, so there is no change, and it's like a very smooth transition from inside and outside, or it can be something which is usually some delta function or something similar, and tells you there is some matter there and there is a transition which is not smooth at all. So he's been working on that and working on very well-known solutions, but using different approaches. For example, for instance, we have the results for Gauss-Codazzi equations with interior and exterior spherical symmetric space-times, and he's doing we know that solutions with one approach, which is using continuity of the energy momentum tensor. He's using Darmois conditions, which are in a sense more general, and seeing we have to obtain the same results basically. So he's studying every step of the way, and also keeping general in a sense, because we need these things are with metrics that are diagonal, spherically symmetric, so they are really beautiful metrics. And the warp drives metrics are not subtly like that. They have out of diagonal turns, so they're more complicated. The construction is different. You have to take care of how you playing a space time with these metrics. So we need something a bit more general than to apply in the scenarios that we're interested in.
And I know that Gabriel is very particular, so he likes to make the calculations by hand, and after that, he's making them in the mathematical notebook, and after that, he's comparing the results, right?
It's that is right.
Yeah,
Yes, it's very meticulous about that.
yeah. Right, well, and also, and just one more thing in relation to the task he's currently doing. Do you mind explaining in a little bit more details what exactly is anisotropic deceptive system?
Dissipative systems and anisotropics. And anisotropy, yeah. Uh, when you have a system that is have a isotropy, anisotropic means that if, for example, you have a spherical system, it means that if you are, let's say, you are in the center and you start looking in every direction, you see the same meaning the same matter, the same densities, the same amount of energy. So you're looking at the same all the time. So this is an isotropic system. And when you have anisotropic systems, these are where the distribution is different. It's located dependent on some functions that are space functions. So you have, for example, more density in one places and less density in others. This distribution is going to be very important, and it's not something that we put with our hands. It's something that it will came up naturally when you solve Einstein's equations. I mean, you put the terms that allow anisotropies in the energy momentum tensor, and also you know that in the metrics and Einstein's equations in Einstein tensor, you have some terms that also allow this anisotropic to be there. And that sense, then when you solve, you will have no, how it's going to be distributed this in matter. On the other hand, dissipative means that you have something that is radiating, that you have heat that is being radiated, electromagnetic radiation. Some loses, you lose some type of matter or energy somehow. And this we want to add. So it's going to be uh, one step at a time. But we will start with anisotropic systems, and then we see if we add dissipative systems, which also the same. You have a space-time and energy momentum tensor that allows those things to happen, and then you see how this evolves.
Awesome, thank you very much for explaining that. And let us in this case move to the task you're currently doing. So you're currently reproducing some of the notarius paper calculations, right?
Yeah, yes, that's correct.
Can you please
Yeah.
go ahead and give us a little bit more details about what exactly you're currently doing?
Well, let me give you some first some context of this. If you go to Alcubierre's, which is a previous Arias paper, Alcubierre's work on he constructed the space-time, the warp drive space-time by sliding, let's say, the space-time in some hypersurface that we call. So it's like taking a surface of constant time. It's like taking a photograph, if you will, uh, and each photograph is a slide of space-time. So in each photograph, you have the three-dimensional space-time living in this photograph, and you take several of those, and then you each one of those you use it to define an hypersurface, and on this hypersurface, then you define some vectors that go once, for example, in a direction that is where directions where the other photographs, the future photographs, are going to be. and there are some vectors that lives on the surface, which is, of course, this surface really means three-dimensional space. So these are vectors that lives in three-dimensional space. These two things that we call light time, time-like, sorry, and space-like hypersurface, and also vectors. This is very important because this is going to tell you how the constructions is going to work, and you need these vectors to make the construction right. So in Alcubierre's proposal, he did this. Of course, he's an expert in this. This is these are tools that are mostly used in when you work in numerical general relativity, or foliations, in fact. Uh, but what Alcubierre did was he proposed, that was the magnificence of his work, this type of metric that you call an hyperbolic spacetime, hyperbolic metric, which then shifted somehow a mixture between components of space and time. And this mixture is going that gives you the the warp structure. Uh, but what he did was he made an implementation for a very specific place, a very specific case, in fact. So now what I'm doing is reproducing Notarios, which he did pretty much the same, but in a more general way and a more mathematically, let's call it mathematically structured way. Uh, and then he start making some definitions for space-time, making some proposals, in fact, a theorem. And what I'm doing is reproducing these propositions and definitions from Notarius papers, what as much details as I can do it. I mean, these are mathematical proofs. The very first ones that I'm doing right now is uh, looking at what he calls well, a globally hyperbolic space-time, which is basically the definition he uses for the metric, and how he defines what we call the warp function, which is a function that is equivalent to the one that Alcubierre uses. And this definition uses some what we call covectors, which are normal vectors to this surface I told you about. And yeah, basically what I was doing was proving that this definition is useful and how to use it to calculate what he used as a proposition, which is that I think some observers that he calls Eulerian observers is also a word that is very well used in medical general relativity. These observers that are equivalent to a free fall observers. Free fall observers that are those that they don't feel the effect of gravity. And to make that, you need to calculate what you call the geodesics equations of the system. The geodesics is like a way of saying that you are calculating almost like the Newton equations of the system in general relativity. In fact, when you have flat space-time, you just starting to curve space-time, you're starting to get corrections to Newton's equations. And these are very useful. These are the equations that you use for making corrections to the GPS, for example. So calculating these geodesic equations, I can tell exactly if an observer is a free fall observer, which are these Eulerian. So what I've been doing is studying these Eulerian observers, which I found recently, yesterday, in fact. These are very well connected to other things. An Eulerian observer is an observer that by itself has some translations and also some deformations. And these deformations are connected with the intrinsic, curvature of the surface you were living in. So as some things are starting to match together very interestingly, because these are not things that are in Notarius paper explicitly. Well, but the point was in Notarius paper and I deviated a bit, sorry, is to calculate the geodesic equations. He made it by using Lagrangians. This is a very interesting approach, which I reproduced already. And I did it by calculating from Einstein's equations directly. And of course, I was expecting to obtain the same results, which of course I did. And there were some technical results, some technical results there that I have problems, but together we figured it out last night.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Nelson. So I think that with that we can close the stand-up for today. Do you have any final remarks you want to share with our listeners?
Well, if you heard this, you have questions, please do. I will be very happy to be answering some of the questions. And if you have any recommendations, of course, they are very welcome too. We are open to all comments and everything. You're just starting, getting more and more exciting.
Nelson, thank you very much. And thank you very much for listening this podcast. And if you like it, please like it, share it, and if you want to support us on Patreon, we're sharing the link below the video. And with that, let me wish to all of you to have a very nice and successful day. Thank you for joining us today.